Okay, hello folks. Welcome to Bards and Books. Welcome to another author interview where I'm joined by yet another favorite author of mine. This is JCM Berne, author of the Hybrid Helix series and Partial Function. Joe, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and any other works I might have missed?
Oh no. So I'm JCM Berne. I wrote the Hybrid Helix. As Usman just said, partial fun. Usman was the first person to do a series review of my oeuvre. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Oeuvre, however it is. I know how to spell it, which is pretty good. Back when only the first three were out, and so now we got the new covers, the new typography, which
Nice.
I'm very excited by. Yeah, we had I was at I tell you, I was at because a lot of people didn't like my old covers, and I was like, but the paintings are really pretty. So I was at Dragon Con talking to Jeff Brown, who's like one of the top two indie artists in the world, and topography's not doing you any favors. And I'm like, really? And he gave me some suggestions, and he said, go to someone else because I'm too busy and too expensive. And I'm like, okay, like, what are you gonna do? And I got my the guy who did the partial function cover, who is J. Caleb Designs, who I love the partial function cover. And he did that. So what have I done? I've done the Hybrid Helix. There are 6 books out. I'm working on book 7 right now. Partial Function, which is an related book. It's really like you don't need to read either to understand the other, but it's the same. It's roughly the same setting. And then I wrote a serialized story called the Grimdwarf in Grimdwarf Magazine, which was a free e-zine that I published for 24 weeks last year, and then I gave up because it wasn't working. It was a cool idea that didn't work, which is fine. And one of these days, I'm going to release that book. I have a cover. I have it. The first 25 chapters is like a book. I have it edited, but I'm not sure. I don't know if I'll sell it or give it away, or I don't know. I don't have time to think about it. Like I took on more than I could. Took
Yeah,
on more than I could handle.
I completely forgot Grimdwarf. Yeah, I loved
Yeah.
Grimdwarf. That was awesome,
Oh,
and
thank you.
everybody's stories that they contributed to. That was an awesome magazine.
That
I hope you do come out with something. That'd be cool to have.
Yeah, I definitely, like I said, I have the cover and I have an edited version of the whole thing. It was very hard to get readers. I think if I could have put more money into it and gotten like cooler covers, I could have made it more popular. But the whole point was I didn't have money to put into it. Like I'm already spending so much on the Hybrid Helix, and that's really my first love. And then the idea that I had that I could just write a chapter of the Grimdwarf every week, kind of in my spare time while doing other things, that did not pan out long term. It ended up being too hard for me to switch like frequencies. Like I'm writing the Hybrid Helix and like, oh, I should do a chapter of the Grimdwarf. It wasn't good. It was harder than I thought it would be. So it failed. But you try things and some of them work and some of them don't. That's okay, right? But I definitely have I would like to return to that and finish the story because I have a really cool reveal that would take like 3 books to get to, because it's about a dwarf and he can't die, and he's got this blink dog named Blink that is a blink dog, and there's a connection there that I think would be a cool reveal, but it would take 2 more books to get to, and it's like one of these days. I want to write 2 more books for partial function series one of these days, but I also have Hybrid Helix is going to be really long, so,
Yeah.
and I have a day
Well,
job,
yeah, some of
sadly.
those Grimdwarf mysteries are still in my mind. I'm still thinking about how that's gonna be revealed. So yeah.
I have answers to all of it, right? I don't. You usually, like when I put that stuff in there, these hints at these mysteries. I have the answer already. I'm not like the writers of Lost. I'm not just
Hmm.
throwing things in there like I don't know how this is going to work out, but we'll see. Like I usually have a pretty solid plan, so I
Yeah.
definitely had a plan for that. So I don't know. I'd like to get back to it. It would help if I could quit the day job. I think a lot of us say that about a lot of things. So.
That's fair.
And
We got some
hey,
Shane
man,
Boyce
Shane.
here. Hello.
Yeah, I was just talking to Shane on Twitter.
All right. So why don't we get to the first question here? I want to
Shoot.
know a bit about. I mean, here's the dilemma I had. You've done a lot of interviews, so this is my third interview. My first two, um, I think I was the first to interview them, but you've done a lot. And so while I was thinking about this, I'm like, are there some original questions I can come up with that proved to be too tough? Maybe there are some here, but I don't know. We'll see. The first thing I want to ask you is about your writing journey. So, when did that start? What inspired you, and how has it been up until now?
So I'm inspired to write, and it took me a long time to figure this out because I didn't really understand it myself until like really just a couple years ago. I'm inspired to write by spite almost entirely. So what'll happen is I'm a very sort of picky person, right? I'm very like finicky, like I mean, I can enjoy a book and like overlook stuff, but generally if there's like a plot hole, it'll really nag at me. If there's like a like, oh, this guy unveils this hidden power, and it's like, well, why didn't he use this power 3 chapters ago when he really could have used it? Like those kind of flaws, right? Those kind of things, they really bug me. So when I'll end up making my own stories in my head, which is where like I'll take like something that I've read that I really like, but it's almost like fanfic. It's almost like, but it'd be even better if blah blah blah, right? If this thing was different, if like or it's like, well, what would I need to change in this setting to make this part make sense? So generally speaking, that's like what really exists. So I started writing really, I was, you know, I was doing some DMing work. I did a lot of world building for as a DM, playing D&D in my 20s. And then I was reading R.A. Salvatore, and he wrote these books called the Clara Quintet, which are, I don't know if they're good. They're fun, right? They're at least fun. And they're a little repetitive, but you know, a lot of these action scenes with these dwarves, and there was something cool about the way he wrote, like kind of like the way the dwarves, they would win fights by just like kind of toughing their way through things. It's like, you know, based on, as opposed to being like very quick or very agile. And he wrote like, and I really was inspired by that. I'm like, I could do this. And also I this is going to sound terrible, but I was like, I can write as well as this guy, which may not be true, but that's kind of how I felt. Cause he's kind of a hack, right? He's a little bit of a pulpy writer. He's fun, but he's not writing like gorgeous, intricate prose. Like, I don't think Patrick Rothfuss or like Steven Erikson, I don't read Malazan and go, oh, I could do this. Cause I couldn't. I can't write like Steven Erikson, right? Even if I can't even imagine it. But like I can write like Robert Salvatore, right? Like I can do that. So so it was in the 90s. I wrote my first book in like 97 or so, and my first book that I sent to a publisher in 98. I was working part-time for UPS, and I really thought this book Tor was going to buy it and I was going to be a full-time writer, which clearly did not happen. And then that didn't happen, and then I sort of said I need to get a real job. Put that on the back burner, and I wrote a superhero novel in 2006. And it's always me taking like a superhero thing and then saying like, well, I want the power system to be more consistent, to be like more of a what they call a hard magic system, like rules to the power sets. And yeah, and then after 2006, I really put it down for a long time. And then in like 2019, I think I was reading Invincible for like the second time, and there was this one particular thing in Invincible. There's this so Invincible, you've read Invincible?
I saw
the
series on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
That's about it.
So
the first season.
his dad goes to this other. So first of all, the kids who are half whatever the hell the species is, I don't remember the name, yeah. but the Kryptonians, but they're not, but they're whatever they are. The half breeds have the full powers of the superpowered aliens, right? So the dad goes to this world where there are these bugs that like they breed really fast and they mature really fast, and that's where Invincible's brother comes from. And I'm like, that's a really potent weapon, right? Because you can make these superpowered creatures really fast, and they mature in like months instead of many years. And you can, and I'm like, I can't believe that this potential existed for hundreds or thousands of years and they never did it. That doesn't make sense to me. You would think that some ambitious member of this race would have been like, I can conquer the universe just by with my penis, right? Like, sorry, but that is the implication, right? So I'm like, there needed to be a reason that wasn't done before, and a reason it's not going to be done in the future. Like, so I created the whole Hybrid Helix out of that. I was like, I got to fix it. It bothered me so much that I wrote, what is an ongoing, seventh book now I'm writing, because I wanted to close the loophole in that one little tiny bit of world building that I felt Robert Kirkman like left hanging. So that's generally how my brain works. Like I'll see something that and it has to be something that I like, right? If it's something I don't like, I'm not motivated to fix it or write the fanfic, right? And then, I don't think the Hybrid Helix is really invincible fanfic. I mean, there are enough differences that you're not going to read my books and be like, oh, this is just Invincible with a different character, right? Like it's different in a lot of ways because it's incorporating the same sort of thing of how I feel about many other properties, like so many influences on those books. I'm an old man, right? I've been reading and consuming media for a long time. So people are often like, oh, you're so creative. And I always joke, I'm like, I just stolen from things you don't know about.
Yeah.
I've stolen a lot from manga, a lot from manhwa, from Korean comics. I've stolen a lot of stuff from there. More's coming. There's a huge giant thing I've stolen that's going to come up in like the next 10 books of the series that we haven't seen yet. Stole a lot from like Dragon Ball Z in terms of tone. This whole like retired gunslinger, like the peaceful guy who's like, and then when he gets mad, then he turns out he's actually like that's Rurouni Kenshin. That's the man from nowhere. Like that's so many places that like I didn't make that up, right? Like these are things that I really liked. And then I was like, put my own little twist on it and jam. And I call it kitchen sink science fiction sometimes because I throw a lot of different stuff in there. And some of it's just to make the story flow better. Like I put kaiju in there just because you don't want your fights to be all the same. Right. So like you have a guy fighting a giant bug. It's like a different feel to the fight than a guy fighting like 5 criminals. Right. So you throw that in there and you make it not to break up the monotony. But yeah, so all that's spite. It's
that's pretty interesting. I mean, that's like, if you don't like something, they always say, well, write your own book or whatever. And then here you are.
But this notion of fanfic is recent. Like, I'm sure people were writing fanfic when I was, your age. But like, we didn't have that. I never heard the word until like maybe the last 10 years. Like we didn't have an internet, right? So if you're writing, you're writing yourself. And maybe there were people putting stuff in like zines and like distributing among their friends, but there wasn't an environment for it. Like there was, I mean, the first thing I ever wrote was like when I was, 10, I was writing like my own Conan stories, but like Conan had a lightsaber or something, it was like, I mean, it's really bad, but today we would call that fanfic and there's like a space for it. And there just wasn't when I was young, but that was generally the gist of it. And then my first like this dwarven enforcer story, because he worked for the mob, my dwarven character in the book I wrote in 98. I still think it's kind of a cool idea because it's like a D&D story, but it's set in an urban environment. And that's because I read P.I. Garrett and I was like, it would be, which is the Glenn Cook series about like a detective in a very much a fantasy city. It's like a D&D type city, but he's a PI, and it's the tone is taken from like film noir, like Dashiell Hammett type stuff. So those are cool books, and I was like, I can do this. I guess something a little different, but maybe the main character like not a human, and put in a little more magic stuff, a little more martial arts because I like putting that stuff in there. So
do you think
that's
that
how I write.
do you think that if you had taken up writing a whole lot later, that you might purely be writing fanfic, or would it be a mix, or what do you think? Because you said there wasn't a space, there wasn't anything like that back when you started, right?
Oh, I mean, I don't know, maybe. No, I'm too like set in my ways. Like like okay. So like I always say, like people may or may not like what I write, but I know what I want. Like there's no like, oh, should I make this funnier? Should I make it less funny? Like what should I do? Like I know like I have a very clear vision of how I want to do it. And I don't want to be constrained by like, oh, it's someone else's characters. Like I wouldn't want to write an Invincible story. I don't want to collaborate with anyone because I have very narrow ideas on how I want the characters to act and how I want the powers to work and like all the science stuff. Like I'm very particular about that. And like I don't want, like someone asked me once, like, oh, someone offered to write a book in my setting. And I'm like, no. Just like why? Make your own stuff.
Yeah.
because I feel like they would do some like cool power that I'm like, that doesn't fit my very like narrows. Cause I'm like, any power that's introduced, like it can't be too easy to abuse, because then someone would be abusing it and they'd be ruling the world. Like if you could steal someone else's power easily without consequences, right? That person would be in charge, right? Like, and it's what was the good example? So Shami Stovall, who's I know who's a lovely person, and I have not read this book, Time Lock Warlock. I haven't read it yet, but she's got the character who can basically rewind time. And my first thought is, well, what if there's another person who can rewind time? Like, who wins? Because at some point, if you rewind time and live a day over and over again, you've got to cut it off, and then you're done, and the day continues, right? Well, so that's the first thing I'm like, well, what if there's two of them? And maybe she answers that. I don't actually. I haven't. The book's on my TBR. I'm going to read it soon. But like, those are the questions. And if there's no answer to that, it's going to like really kind of stop me and pull me out of the book. Mm-hmm. So. These conflicts, like with all that stuff. So
that's a pretty interesting way of thinking, though, because that's like, I'm assuming then you just plan things meticulously and make sure there's no like plot holes or anything of that kind, right? Is that like a big fear? Is that like a big fear of yours if somebody finds like some sort of plot hole or something in your work?
Well, like it's. Yeah, it's I'm not so much a fear. I'm more worried that I'm going to find it than anybody else, because I'm but like there's definitely like, as soon as you commit to that sort of thing, you're really like, so I committed to a few things when I wrote the series. One is Rohan is not the chosen one, right? He can, if he's going to like basically change, like if he's going to change the world, there has to be a really solid explanation for why no one changed the world 50 years before, or 100 years before, or 200 years before. Like it can't just be like destiny, right? Because that bugs me. So, and then like I can't do the Dragon Ball Z thing where like more and more powerful enemies just keep showing up just when the heroes are ready to meet them. Like, well, if Cell had shown up like two series before, Dragon Ball Z would have been over. Why didn't he? Like, I need, there has to be a reason, right? There has to be an internal logic, which constrains me moving forward. But I like the constraints. Like, to me, it makes it fun. And I think people appreciate it, even if they don't appreciate it consciously. I think people get something, even if it's subconscious, sort of knowing like this is like, it's backwards compatible, right? Like a new thing pops up, but there's it doesn't nullify everything that happened before. Like, it's not like, well, the balance of power was never there. And so it makes it a challenge, but it's fun.
Yeah. I appreciate that, like, because Dragon Ball Z is my favorite anime of all time, and that is something to think about. What if?
It's terrible.
What if Cell came way earlier?
I love it, right? I love DBZ, but it makes no sense, and that's fine, right? Like every one of these things, you've got a suspension of disbelief, right? You've got to put certain things and say, like, I'm not going to worry about the fact that this makes no sense, but I'm just a bitter, angry man, I guess. And I want to find the holes and like plug them up. And it will bother me that, why did this happen now? And what, not a year ago or 2 years ago. I loved it, but I love DBZ. I mean, I love it. Like, I don't speak like, oh, this, I'm not saying like it has this flaw and it sucks, so I'm going to fix it. It's like, it has this flaw and I love it, so I want to fix it. It's more like that. And DBZ is a huge inspiration. Like the martial artists flying is DBZ, right? It's the Piccolo. Piccolo training. Probably my favorite moment in all of media, is Piccolo is training Gohan, and Gohan starts to Gohan starts to transform into a monkey, right? Because it's the full moon, and Piccolo goes, well, that's inconvenient. So he points and he blows up the moon with a ki blast, right? And I'm like, like anyone is like, oh, how unrealistic is it? I just explained that scene, and they're like, oh, okay, this isn't like your typical martial arts movie level of unrealistic. This is like a whole nother thing. And they're like, the moon's gone forever. And there's something so beautiful about that scene. It's like it's crazy, and it's it's like, okay, these guys are just doing something different.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Well, for myself, I do enjoy work, and I will say that I'm not like very well versed in comics and manga and even a lot of anime. I have seen and read my fair share, but uh, relating to your series, I don't. It does feel fresh and original, and I can't really,
Thank you.
I see like some things that you're kind of inspired by here and there, but I don't see like an overabundance of it. So that's just where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I have not had people tell me that it feels derivative because no, people have. I've had reviewers say that, but I'm stealing from a lot of different places. So that really helps. Like if you steal from one place, that's a problem. If you steal from
Yeah.
a lot of places, it's less of a problem. So that's what I don't know if I wouldn't say I tried to do that or I set out to do that. It's just what comes naturally because I had a lot of stuff I want to put in there. And then I have a unit, and then I've got the unifying sort of themes that make it
Mhm.
feel like one thing. Like there's definitely like a few sentences that sum up what the whole series is about, right? So I'm sticking to that. So everything's within that framework.
So I have a question. Did Invincible come after DBZ?
That's an excellent question. I read it after.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
DBZ is still going on, or Dragon Ball Super is now. But I mean, like,
yeah.
but I watched DBZ before I read Invincible. I don't remember the publication history.
Okay. Well, anyways.
Invincible is much more of like a classic comic. It's much more like sort of a modern retelling of Superman.
Okay.
A lot, right?
Yeah,
The,
because when I watched Invincible, and I saw Omni Man and like what he does, right? Like how what his race does. They come and they take over planets. I just kept thinking of Saiyans. I'm like, this is like Saiyans. This is what they do, right?
it
How much?
is, and I don't know Robert because it's also a little bit like what Kryptonians could have done. I always
Mhm.
thought of it, and I don't actually know. I don't know Robert Kirkman, so I don't. He Dragon Ball was definitely out before Invincible was, so I don't know who he was influenced by, honestly. But in my mind, they're very similar,
Mhm.
and that's what's so interesting about like the end of that, because if you read the comic, that's that whole first volume, he thinks Omni-Man's a hero, and I'm gonna spoil it for everyone, but sorry, it's been out for like a long time now. And then he realizes his dad was sent to conquer the planet, which is very much like Saiyans.
Mhm.
See, like he thought his dad was Superman. It turns out his dad was Vegeta or Goku, right? So, oh, now I wonder. I wonder if Kirkman read new DBZ. I actually don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I haven't like watched interviews with the guy. Like, I don't think. I think I'm newer to the idea of like watching interviews with these people, and I watch a lot more indie stuff because I'm friends with a lot of the booktubers who interview indie authors. So I don't watch a lot of interviews with like the Robert Kirkmans of the world. Um, like I'm sure I've seen like someone like Adrian Gibson talk a lot more than like Robert Kirkman or Jim Butcher even. Although I've seen a couple of Jim Butcher interviews. Jim Butcher's a big hero of mine, and that was another thing that was a big inspiration was Dresden Files.
Yeah.
Like structurally, right? The whole one main character, one point of view. I mean, Dresden's first person, I'm third person, but it's still very similar. You're really seeing everything through one character's like view, and then this very long series of standalones, but that tell a continuing story. I love that. I love that. And like Dresden Files is one of the best examples of it, where things change, right? Like there's a lot of there's a lot of like lots of books about the same character, but they tend to be that those archetype characters like Conan. Conan doesn't really change. It's still Conan, right? You don't have to read one story to understand the next one. You might be in a different spot, but who cares? Or James Bond. James Bond doesn't change. But I wanted more where things evolve, which definitely happens in Dresden Files. So and then Jim Butcher's got a lot of humor in there. And I was like, that's my thing. I can't write, I get bored if I don't write funny. Like I've tried. I've actually tried to write like a very straight-laced, like serious character, and I get tired. so
Yeah. No, that's
it's
fair.
got to be a lot of.
Okay, we're 25 minutes in, and on the second question now. but it's okay. I only got about 5 here. So
Works for me.
the next one, I just wanted to touch on your publishing journey. So what does your self-publishing journey look like? What are some challenges that you faced? And I'm assuming it is a lot smoother now compared to when Wistful Ascending came out. I could be wrong.
Okay. So the thing to sort of understand is that self-publishing, as you know it, did not exist before like 2012, right? Like when I think it was 2012 when the Kindle came out. Like self-publishing when I first started writing books was literally you would pay like out of pocket thousands of dollars to get a print run, which was like had to be like 1,000 or 2,000 copies, or it wasn't cheap. And then you would sell them out of the trunk of your car at conventions. And people did this and people made money doing this, but it wasn't scalable. Like no one was selling, like Aragon was sold that way, but it was really hard and really rare to make any money at it or make any your hand selling, right? And then when the Kindle came out, all of a sudden you could release an ebook and potentially sell 1 million of them in a day, right? That wasn't super common, but you could. So I wrote several books before that sort of platform existed, because I wrote books in 98, in 2006, and then in 2012 I wasn't really paying attention because I had a career change and I was working really hard at my actual day job. And then it was in 2019 and I sort of had a breather, a little extra time, and I was like, oh, like I could actually do this. I could actually sell a book. So I said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to, because I when I say I've written like 3 or 4 novels in the 90s and 2000s, I also wrote at least a half dozen like first chapters of a series that I just never had the wherewithal to like continue. Right. So they're all in a trunk somewhere or a box or a hard drive. So 2019 or so, I had this idea from Invincible and it kind of coalesced, and I got a lot of the ideas that ended up in Wistful Ascending kind of came together in my head, which is what happens to me every few years. I get a bunch of ideas that coalesce in my head into a thing that I want to do because I'm watching something and I go, oh, that's cool, but it'd be better if blank. So it turns into a story. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to finish it, and gosh darn it, I'm going to publish it. And I say this now, and I've seen like Facebook posts from myself from 2019. I'm going to publish it even if it sucks. That was my rule. That was I literally, put that on my monitor. I'm like, I'm going to publish this. And that motivated me to actually write the whole thing, because first chapters are easy. It's the next, 120,000 words that are hard. So, I wrote Wistful Ascending, and I was like, I checked it for typos. That was my editing process. That was it. I knew nothing about writing. I'd never taken a writing class. I'd never taken a creative writing class. I hadn't watched like a Sanderson lecture on writing. I didn't know what like passive voice was. I had no idea. But I guess I had enough like natural storytelling ability that I wrote a decent book, and I published it. I got a cover from I can't remember the name. Deviant. No, not Deviant. Deranged Doctors, I think it's called. It's like one of these graphic design houses that's like in somewhere in Eastern Europe, and so they're cheaper, right? Because pay rates, you don't have to pay someone as much who's a graphic designer in like Czechoslovakia as you do if they work in Manhattan. And they churn out covers, and it was like $300 for the cover, and I'm like, I can do that. And I didn't get an editor, no editing, and I published the book. Here's the original cover. All right, $300 cover.
Wow.
And I put it on Amazon, and I had just enough positive feedback from people that surprised me. And I was like, I might actually should maybe do this the right way, right? Like maybe this is actually worth really trying. So then I was like, oh, so then I did things like I watched all of Brandon Sanderson's lecture. I didn't take an actual class in writing, but I read a lot about the craft, and I watched a lot of videos on craft, and I hired an actual editor to go through the book and like tear it apart for me. And, if you have an editor tear apart even one chapter of what you write, I highly recommend that, because you will learn stuff like, oh, I'm using M dashes wrong. Once you learn how to use an M dash, you can figure it out, and then you can use M dashes right. So that first editor it helped me a lot. I cut 10,000 words out of the book. I rewrote. The story is basically the same, but like on a paragraph by paragraph level, it's way better now. Like I learned how to like construct sentences and paragraphs. Still had flaws. I still think that's a flawed book in a number of ways, but and then I re-released it when I got a better cover, And I, how I got my cover artist. I've told the story a million times because I'm a dumbass, right? Like I literally was like, oh, I need a cover artist. And I looked, behind, I was like, oh, I like Harry Dresden. Who did this cover? Oh, Chris McGrath. Oh, I'll contact. It was my entire process, like 45 seconds of research. And I was like, oh, and I emailed Chris and I'm like, will you do a cover for me? And he's like, if you pay me, I will. I'm like, well, I can do that. So, which is not, I don't know if it was a smart investment, but I do love my cover art, I have to say. So I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it from a business perspective. It might have been a poor choice. I don't know, but like from a personal satisfaction. So then I wrote the book. I really spent a lot of time learning how to write. I hired an editor for Return of the Griffin, a line editor, which I really feel like I need. I need someone who like cleans up the stuff. I probably need it less than I used to, but I still need it. And then I released them both and no one cared because that's what happens when you're an indie author, right? If you just put your books on Amazon, like no one's going to just run into them and, oh, this is brilliant. And I'll tell my 10 friends and they'll tell 10 friends. And now you'll sell 1 million books. Like that maybe that can happen, but it's really unusual. And then I entered SPIFBO 8 and I started following people who were following SPIFBO 8 on Twitter, right? They were following hashtag SPIFBO 8. And I was like, do you want my book? Can I send you a copy? Will you review it to people who were just interested? And things took off from there. It really started. This guy named Jordan Buxton, who he had a YouTube channel for like 12 seconds. Super nice guy. And I was like, do you want my book? And he's like, I don't know. Because you don't know, right? If you just have some random indie author tell you, do you want to read my book? The answer should probably be no, because it's usually really bad. I'm sorry, but most books are terrible, right? Like that's just, people don't really give me, I say this a lot and I should get flack for it. I really don't. But if you just randomly pick a book on Amazon that has like 12 reviews or 12, 12 or 3 ratings, or it's usually awful. You might find a gem, but you got to go through a lot of books before you find it, right? Because anyone can publish a book, right?
That's fair.
So,
yeah.
And then I gave it to this other guy, and Jordan said, well, if he took a book, I'll take a book. And then Jordan read it, and Jordan liked it. I still talk to Jordan, and Jordan got Andrew's Wizardly Reads to read it, and he gave me a dedicated review. And that kind of kicked everything off because like from there, now a bunch of people had heard of me. And then once people have heard of you and heard a glowing review, now they're like, oh, do you want a book? And they're like, I gave out a lot of books. So, and then things kind of took off from there. I didn't get very far in SPIFBO. I got eliminated in the first round, which I still remember with resentment, and it's fine. And I entered SPSFC. And I got eliminated in the first round. And then the next year I entered SPSFC again, because you can enter twice if you get eliminated in the first round. And I made it to the semifinals, but no further. But it's fine. But I managed to accumulate. I don't know how exactly, but one thing led to another, and then I was like available to people on YouTube. It was like if someone says, "Oh, you want to do a thing?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, hell yeah, I'll talk." Because I'm an extrovert. I don't mind. I love doing this kind of stuff. This stuff doesn't stress me out. I know a lot of authors who will be on a interview like this, and they're like, "Oh man, I'm really nervous beforehand." I'm like, I'm not. Like if I'm drinking tequila, but not because I'm nervous, just because I like tequila. So I ended up. One thing led to another, and I ended up. And if you look on YouTube, right, you put my name or Wistful Ascending into YouTube, and there's a lot of videos, which is cool. So I'm very grateful. But a lot of people have read the book, and I think there's something I don't quite know why, but I feel like a lot of people read my book, and something about the cover and the blurb and the marketing makes them think it's not going to be as good as it is, which isn't to say it's a great book, but they have lowered expectations. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a presumption about a superhero story that they expect it to be kind of like written for 12-year-olds, because it's not. It's not a YA. It's a book written for grown-ups. I don't know if it's the cover. I don't really know exactly, but I get a lot of this than I thought it was going to be. I'm like, okay. So it's always like exceeding expectations is always a better marketing than meeting them, right? Mm-hmm. So one thing led to another, and but I'm still losing a lot of money, right? Like that's the unfortunate part, right? Like my cover is expensive, my cover artist is fantastic, but he charges what he's worth, and that's a lot, and I'm not making that back. My audio, I think my audio is, I'm going to break even on my audiobook this year. I'm going to try to get my narrator back for 2 more books, because Wayne had some issues, personal financial stuff, and he hasn't been doing narration for a year. So now I need to get a couple more done. So hopefully, he says he's going to be back to narration at the end of 2025. So I'm going to try to at least get the next 2 done by him. But I came to terms with, sometime around, I think 2023, I was at Dragon Con and I was meeting a bunch of authors, and all of a sudden I realized that, like, I feel very like I'm happy. Like, I can't retire on this money. It's like a hobby, right? Like, I know people who own boats. Like, you don't make money off your boat. You spend money to have a boat. I spend money to be an author, but like, I get a lot out of it, right? I get to talk to people like you. You wouldn't know who I was if I didn't write these books. We never would have met, right? Where you're in Vancouver, am I wrong?
Vancouver, yeah.
Okay, so you're from Rohan's hometown.
Yeah.
I have this reference to the Vancouver Zoo in one of the books. I just had to, like, seriously, I was like Googling, like, I'd never been to Vancouver. I'm like, what the hell is there to do in Vancouver? I had no idea. Never been there. But I'm friends with all these people from all over the world. Like, I'm friends with, I don't want to start naming names, but like a lot, I go to cons. I don't have any moments at a con where I'm like, I don't know what to do and I'm by myself, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like that. It's cool.
Probably helps to be an extrovert.
Yes. Yeah.
I am the complete opposite. Hardcore introvert. So yeah.
I'm a very social animal, just by nature. And I like to drink. So I'm never bored at cons. But you come to Worldcon and I'll take you around and introduce you to everybody.
Yeah, that's
the.
I really want to go.
That's the trick
on my list.
Yeah, that's the trick. You find the person. My person was Dirk Ashton. So Dirk Ashton, who wrote the Patronus series and is just like the nicest person. He was going to Dragon Con, and Sadir Samir, who's a friend of mine, was coming from Sweden. And I was like, okay, if Sadir's coming from Sweden, to come to Dragon Con, I can come from New York. It was in Atlanta. Dragon Con's in Atlanta. I don't know if you, US East Coast, I'm like 2/3 of the way up the coast. Atlanta's like, it's like a 12-hour drive, but it's like an hour flight, right? Or 2-hour flight, something like that. I don't want to assume everyone knows where Atlanta is, but that's where it is. So I went there, but like, Dirk's the kind of guy who's like, make sure you meet everyone and make sure, next we're going to go to this place. Let's all make sure to meet, you don't just look up at the bar and everyone's gone and you don't know where they went. He's just super good that way. And I met a lot of people at Dragon Con in 23 and then in 24. Dirk wasn't there in 24. He was at Worldcon Glasgow, which I couldn't make it to because there's only so much I can justify spending on this stuff. I mean, but I'm going to be at Worldcon this summer. I'm really excited because Worldcon really brings in more of the writer people. Dragon Con is a huge con, but only some of its writers. It's also a lot of like Star Wars fans and like, anime fans, which is great, but it's like 70,000 people, but you're only really interested in like 5,000 of them or whatever. But Worldcon's going to be fun. Worldcon, never been to Seattle.
I do want to go because Seattle's not very far away from me, and in Canada, I mean, the only con I know is like Fan Expo. That's like the only con that I can think of that comes around me that has like some fantasy authors and stuff in it. So.
Yeah, Tao Wong is heavily involved with some indie writer thing that's in, but I think that's around Toronto. That's not exactly close to you. I don't know what else. Worldcon's the big one for writers, and people from like overseas will come, and I'm pretty excited about that. And writers are, even some very big names are often very approachable. Like you can't go and just like talk to Jim Butcher, right? I mean, you can, but like he's gonna get a mob, right? But like people even just like a step down from that are not gonna get mobbed. In a place like I was at Dragon Con last year, and like Sebastian de Castell was just like sitting and talking to me for like hours. And like he's a pretty big name, but like he's not a big enough name to get mobbed at Dragon Con, Yeah. So it's super cool, and like I felt like I was part of the group, and I was like, oh. So that's when I really kind of realized, like, okay, so if writing just ends up being my boat, You know, like every year I spend a bunch of money on the boat and I never make anything back, but I have a boat. I'm like, okay, I have books. You know, you can
Yeah.
look me up in Amazon and there's a bunch of books there and with a bunch of ratings and reviews. And I get like
Yeah.
fans come up to me at DragonCon, like, will you sign my book? Not a lot, not like two, right? Like two, but like
Mhm.
that's more than zero.
That's
Like, will
pretty
you
cool.
sign my
So,
book? I know, it was so
yeah.
cool. It was so cool. It was so nice. And
Mhm.
I love that stuff, you know.
So yeah, so like those early challenges, I can see that you getting to know how how the business works or how
It's
to
really
make things
hard.
more efficient. But what about like the latest release, Suppression of Powers? How was that for you, that release?
Well, like from a mechanical perspective, it's much easier, right? Like I
Yeah.
know how, like for example, like for me to publish a book on actually doing the work on Amazon to like get the book out is like half an hour, right? I have like ISBNs and well, you can, if you're in Canada, you can get ISBNs for free, but in the US, we can't. It's a whole different thing there. But like
Mm.
all that's, but that stuff I know. And like, I didn't know any of that stuff in 2019. Like, how would you, right? Normal people don't know the, like how to get an ISBN for your book, right? Like that's
Yeah.
not, so once you write a few indie books, that part of it becomes like very easy. So like the formatting, like I have software to format a book. If I have a Word document, I have a workflow with the Word document. I don't have to think about it anymore. That saves you time and energy. Like now it really is just about the story. And then I know how to, I have my artist. I know how to like work with him, which is mostly just I give him a vague idea of what I want and he does whatever he wants. And then it's always great because that's what you do with Chris McGrath. You just give him suggestions, then he does what he wants to do and it comes out and it's like fantastic. I'm like, okay, what are you going to do? Right. Um, and then I sort of understand but I mean, I'm also in a very privileged space where I can just spend money on stuff. Like, if you're really so here's the thing, right? You can do indie publishing without spending money, but it takes more time. If you want to find that artist who can do the cover is going to be, and it really helps if you are good at sort of, I want to call it, there's a skill set that people don't talk about. And I think of it as it's being an art director. You don't need to be an artist, but you need to be able to look and say, like, what kind of graphic design is going to work for your book? What kind of cover you want? What's the style of art you want? Some people are great at this. My favorite example is Baptiste Pinson Wu. He's a writer, and every single one of his covers is amazing. And they're not the same. They're different artists, different tones, but they're all freaking bangers. If you look at his covers, I don't have that skill. I have to get really lucky to get a good cover. I know that because I have a lot of bad covers you've never seen where I ordered a cover and I told the person what I want. They did what I want. I looked at the cover. I'm like, this sucks.
Mm.
I don't know why, but this is terrible because I gave them bad art direction, right? Like, I'm not good at that. So it really helps to have that skill set or to have a lot of time. Like the people I know who get great covers, the indie authors are often like spending like many hours on like um it used to be Deviant Art, but I think there's other places where you can just sort of go through people's portfolios and like click to the next, find someone who does art that will work for their cover and then hire them. And you can get people who are cheaper than Chris McGrath. Chris McGrath is charging a premium because he's Chris McGrath, right? Like
Mhm.
he's doing my stuff in between like the next Dresden book and like a Dune special edition, right? He should charge more. So I'm paying a lot of money to get over the fact that I'm not a good art director, right? Because or I could spend dozens of hours looking at like amateur artists and finding one who could do a cover that would work for me, but I'm not good at like seeing it.
Yeah.
So, but everything's easier now, right? Like I stupid stuff like I don't have to think about what software I'm going to use to write. But I
Mhm.
did in 2019. I just spent a lot. What, do I write on Google Docs? Do I use Google? Do I use Microsoft Word? How do I save things? What do I name my files? Like that's all that dumb stuff. It
Mhm.
just takes, you write 4 books and you got it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
All right. So I want to dive a
questions,
little bit into Hybrid Helix now
go
because
for it.
it is one of my favorite series currently.
Mm,
So
I
I
really appreciate that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I want to say I really appreciate anyone who reads, I appreciate anyone who reads any of the books. I really appreciate people who read the series because to me, no, the Wistful Ascending doesn't tell the story I want to tell. It's the whole thing. It's the changes. It's the
Mhm.
way things change from book to book. It's the arc, the whole thing. Like I really feel like people are only going to understand what I'm trying to do when they read Suppression of Powers. you know, and then it's like, oh, okay, you can see what I'm sort of building towards, because
Mhm.
by itself, like I could have written a series of books that are just Wistful Ascending over and over again.
Yeah.
You know, he's on the station and like some threat comes and he like punches it and the threat goes away and the book's over and everyone has a meal. You
What do
know,
you
and
call
then the
that,
next,
monster of the week?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And like it'd be a lot easier to write, right? Like, you know, but like I very deliberately didn't do that.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate when people give it a chance and see that that's not all I was doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. You had a question and I'm interrupting you and just like,
No, that's all good. I was gonna say, so some of the themes in Wistful Ascending, was there a focus on some elements that you wanted to incorporate in terms of themes? Like some, like one that really permeates is I don't know about justice, but like fixing a corrupt system, right? That's something you touch on. Also, the rage that that these hybrids are dealing with all the time. So, what were some themes that you wanted to focus on, whether it's from a grand standpoint or like emotional stuff?
did you ever read Spawn by Todd McFarlane? You familiar with it?
I'm familiar with
Okay.
Spawn. I haven't read it.
Okay. So when Spawn started, I don't even know if he kept up. I haven't kept up with it. But when Spawn started, the whole idea was Spawn had like he was this guy who had a power. He had basically unlimited power. He could do anything, but there was like a countdown. And he had come from hell. I forget the details, but basically he had like this much power and he could do anything, but it would use up his power bar. And once it went down, it didn't refill. And once it went down to zero, he went back to hell.
Mm.
And Todd McFarlane used to say that it was so he could tell like Superman stories where the guy's using him, because if you want to save the world, okay, you're going to use up some of that power bar. But if you want to tell but most of the time you're going to try to solve the problem without using, because you only got so much. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's kind of smart, because then you can tell Batman stories and Superman stories of the same character, because he's not going to Superman his way through every situation, because he's going to use up his power bar and he's going to die, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, well, how do you have he can fight like very potent things, but he's not, why isn't he just rolling out the Superman stuff for every opponent? And it's like, well, if he's got this berserker rage and the more power he uses, the more likely he is to freaking lose it and kill a bunch of innocent people. That's a pretty good, he's going to hesitate, right? It's going to give him a really solid reason to not just go full Super Saiyan on every enemy. And the same thing happens with, I mean, this is not my invention, right? This whole like going berserk when you use too much power. This is a Saiyan thing, right? Like I'm sure it's in other places. I can't think of them right off the top of my head, but I'm sure it happens in other. So it lets you tell stories where it gives you sort of partially an explanation for why the character doesn't just like go OP on all his opponents. So he's got to try to think. I always want Rohan to try to think of a clever solution. And I do this in my outlines. I'll be like, in my outline for the book, I'll be like, oh, Rohan fights this guy. And then Rohan finds a clever way to defeat this guy. And that's all that's in my outline. And then I'm writing the book and I get to that chapter and I'm like, son of a gun. I have no idea how he's going to do that. Like I have to think of it while I'm writing, because in the outline, that's all I had. So that was part of it. And then, and then when he really lets loose, those are some of for me, it's like those are some satisfying moments, but also scary moments. And the other part of it is it is a way to have this notion of there are consequences. Like some people get really into like, okay, nothing wrong with Grimdark. Nothing. I like Grimdark. I've read Grimdark stories. I love them. It's not my favorite genre, but I've read many that I really enjoyed. Some people will defend Grimdark or say they like it because they're like, well, if no one dies, there's no consequences. I'm like, that's BS, right? There's plenty of ways you can lose without someone dying, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like there's many consequences in life that aren't just someone dies, right? There's a whole range. So here it lets me put the story where I don't want too much tension. That was part of the reason I wrote the story. I wanted the story where you're not really worried Roland's going to get killed or lose, but you're a little worried that he's going to lose his temper and maybe do something he doesn't want to do and maybe hurt some innocent people, because he does it in the first book, right? He does it in the, maybe not innocent people, but definitely does stuff he shouldn't, bad things that he's going to regret. So it lets you add these consequences in where you're not really worried he's going to die or lose, but you're worried that he's going to go too far. And like in book 1 and in book 4, he really does, he does, but he wins, he survives, and the bad guys end up dead, right? So like, okay, but you definitely have consequences because he's definitely not happy with the way that turned out. And I don't, as a reader, you're not happy with the way it turned out, even though in the moment you're like, okay, this is kind of cool. I'm glad he's beating these guys. But at the end, you're like, so it's a way to give these consequences without the threat of death or the threat of losing, because that was a whole, again, I've said this before. I take this from these Telugu action films where the hero, I don't know how many of these you watched, like Bahubali and RRR and the Solar. I freaking love these movies. I'm not going to say they're good, but I love them. And generally speaking, that especially more than Bollywood, but it's the South Asian movies where the hero is like super overpowered and you're like, he can't lose. But how cool is he going to look? At what point will he cut loose? That's what makes you watch the movie. Yeah. I don't know how many of these you've seen. I'm a huge fan of this is why Rohan is I've said this before. This is why Rohan's South Asian, right? Because it's like little like wink wink to these movies that inspired me. But right. Yeah. So that was the whole thing with the rage, right? It was like giving a consequence and a real one. Actually, it's funny in the first version of Wistful Ascending, like after he really loses it and kills a bunch of people and commits war crimes, basically. And then I had him, and people were like, you kind of just committed war crimes. I had him much more like angry, like screw you, like they deserved it. And then on rewrite, I'm like, I had him much more like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And that was a big turning point for me understanding his character, was rewriting that scene. It was a very small change, like a few lines of dialogue, where it was like, instead of him being defensive, like, oh, they deserved it, he's like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. Like, that was probably uncool. Like, he's not like crying and like, oh, I wish I were dead kind of overreacting, but he was also like, yeah, no, that wasn't cool. And that helped me understand Rohan, that scene. But yeah. So that theme carries through.
Yeah. To touch on the South Asian thing, I know you. I remember talking to you, and the reason why I found your books was your video where you talked about Rohan being South Asian.
Why is Rohan brown?
Yeah. So here's the thing. At the time, I was relatively new to reading fantasy and just discovering books avidly. So before your books, I never thought about that. I never thought about, oh, let me read a book about someone that I might be able to connect with on a deeper level. So I went into it hoping that I could, thinking I might be able to get something out of it, because it seems to be a lot more prominent than it used to be, right? So but honestly, after reading your books, I discovered it's not really important to me. It's to connect with a character, and it's probably the least important thing that I found reading your books.
I didn't really write Rohan thinking like, oh, brown guys everywhere are going to identify with him because he's also a brown guy. Like, that wasn't really my intention. Yeah. I'm like, if someone has that experience, fantastic. And I've had some people say like they love the fact that they see their culture represented in there. I've had a few people say that to me, but I'm like, that wasn't really, it really was, because these aren't, in the really important ways, he's much more a product of this like alien society, is a much bigger part of what his power set and his upbringing as an alien is, a much bigger part of who he is than the fact that he's Telugu, right? Like, it matters a little bit. And there's some jokes I throw in there in book 2 because he meets his mom, and his mom like trying to get him married. And I've had a bunch of Indian people, like Telugu or anywhere in India. And this is very like, this is exactly what an Indian mom would do in this scenario. And I'm like, okay, that, because I get that. I mean, I've watched enough movies. I understand my wife's South Asian. I understand the culture on a superficial level, right? Like, I get it. but that wasn't really the point of the book, right? That wasn't the point of making. I wasn't really trying to say something deep about being like Indian, about being an immigrant. I was trying to say something superficial about being Indian, but as a nod again to these things that influenced me and these things that I love, the pop culture stuff, the movies, and really I mean, in a way, Rohan's story, and I thought about this years after writing like Wistful Ascending. A couple years later, I was thinking like, in a way, his story is much more about a white guy in the sense that in the galactic, like on Earth, he was a brown dude, but in the galaxy, he saw him as, he spent many years as a member of this very privileged racial class, because as a hybrid, he was like the highly honored and respected and needed and feared. And in a way, he's got guilt about being at the top of the heap for so long, which is sort of how a white person might feel. Not, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not a particularly, he's not an oppressed minority once he's off Earth. Right. Once he's off Earth, if anything, he's a privileged minority, right? Top 1%, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of his life. So yeah, I don't know. I thought I would get flack. About writing about a minority character when I'm not from that culture, and not one person has given me crap about it. And I thought this would happen, and it never happened. Maybe it will. Maybe one day I'll be popular, and someone will be like, "Hey, you're a white dude writing about a brown guy. Like, that's not cool." I'm like, I don't know. But so far, no. And I've had some, again, I've had a bunch of Telugu people say, "Oh, this was kind of cool. This was fun. It was nice to see my culture reflected." I'm like, okay, cool.
I can see that. I can understand people really connecting when you've got so many cultural references and whatnot. But maybe I'm just too Canadian. I don't know. I was born and raised in Canada, so
and the Canadian stuff is very superficial too, right? Like, it's like he says, he likes hockey. I think I say it once. I think I made him Canadian. I don't even know why I did that. I think it was to pull off a joke. I think someone said like, "You're very polite," and it's the stereotype. If you live in the States, that Canadians are very polite. I don't know. I lived near Canada for a very long time, because I lived in Buffalo, New York, which is like, I was like literally 20 minutes from the border. And this is pre 9/11. So pre 9/11, you could just go to Canada and like, they just wave you. If you were white, they would just wave you through the border. Like, they wouldn't even like look in your car. Right. I say if you were white because I had like I had an East Asian roommate. We went over the border, and like, I was a kid. I didn't know shit. And he's like, "Oh, they're going to stop us because I'm in the car." And I'm like, "They won't stop us. They never stop us." And they stopped us. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." It was like an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Got some people coming in. Knights of Rill. Was it a tool to show a glimpse of a brighter future with less of those social issues like racism?
So actually, a funny thing, in the original version of Return of the Griffin, which I just replaced, there was more of those social issues like racism in the book, and people reacted generally negatively to it. And I think it took me a long time to respect that and to see why, because I think it took them out of the immersion, because Wistful is a very like idyllic place, right? No one cares what color you are, right? Everyone sort of gets along, and everyone's generally very nice. And that was very much, it was exactly that. It was a tool to show the sense where the people just didn't care about what color you were, or how much fur you had, or how many legs or how many limbs or eyes you have, because this just doesn't matter. And it's like, can you make like a good cup of coffee or not? That's all people care about, stuff like that, right? And yeah, I mean, it's like it's a choice. It's not even about realism, right? Like, I'm not even saying that depicting this. I don't want to say it's a utopia, and they have their problems, but generally, okay. So here's my vision of Grimdark. In Grimdark books, people are generally bad. If someone has a choice, they're going to usually do the selfish, self-centered, evil, but maybe thing, right? They're not generally capital G good. That's, to me, what characterizes Grimdark. And there might be people who are really good in there, but they're the minority. Most people are kind of not, and that might be realistic. I'm not arguing, but I'm like, I don't want to write that. I'm going to write a book because I'm going to escape. We're going to have an escape. We're going to have an escape from this real world where shitty things happen. And when you read my books, most people, when given a choice, unless they really have a reason, are going to be nice. They're going to be nice. They're going to be pleasant. They're going to be like happy to have you. They're going to come sit, have a drink. And that was very deliberate. And it wasn't me saying that that's a more realistic portrayal of people. It was me saying that I get to write a fictional world. I get to do what I want. And I generally do think that in a post scarcity environment with high tech and with everyone can have enough with very little labor, I think people will be like that eventually. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not going to try to prove it. I can't. But like that, I choose to believe that, and so I'm going to write a book where, like in the books, generally, like in the people, and I thought about this a lot, like in the last year. There are very few very bad people in these books. The villains are almost all scared and broken. The people doing bad things are almost all scared and broken. They're not mean. They're not evil for the sake of it. They're not just self-centered and bad, right? They're afraid, and they do bad things to try to protect themselves and their own. And that's a theme. And again, that's how I chose to do it. And because like Sauron is just evil, but like I don't have any Saurons.
Yeah.
There are people who might there are elements in the books that might seem like Saurons so far, but then keep reading. I've got 19 books to go. Are the Proud Guys still in Return of the Griffin? No. I replaced so Return of the Griffin had this evil. I needed an evil group that Rohan has to recruit them to fight the sharks, and then people get mad at him because he like basically gave them amnesty in order to use them, because if he didn't use them, he thought the world would end. So he's doing this end justifies the means thing, and that's his big flaw in book 2. Right? He's doing the end justifies the means thing, and he shouldn't be. Every book has Rohan screws up in some way or another. That's how I start the book. How is Rohan going to screw up this book? So the problem with the Proud Guys is, if you're American, they're a satire of the Proud Boys, who are a neo-Nazi group. And I'm like, well, if people are big fans of the Proud Boys, I don't want them reading my books anyway, which I'll still say. If you're a big fan of the Proud Boys, don't read my books. I don't want your business. But the problem is the Proud Guys is they took people out of the book, right? They broke immersion. Proud Boys are very much a product of like 2016 to now. Feel very modern. They're very much about like real things that are really happening, that are really awful in the political climate in America. And it was making it hard for people to read the book. And I got enough complaints, and I finally realized people aren't upset because they like the Proud Boys. People are upset because they don't want to be reminded of the Proud Boys while they're reading a superhero story about giant sharks. So I took them out, and I replaced them with just like random, like the collectors, who I actually kind of like, who are just like organized criminals. They're super powered characters. I don't go into a whole ton of detail because they're not a big part of the book. There's not like 100 pages about the Proud Guys. Then there's not 100 pages about the collectors. It's almost a swap, almost like scene for scene. But it's the same storyline, right? Rohan goes to the collectors, who are established as like old enemies of Rohan and Vanguard Prime back in New York, when they were in superheroes in New York, which is this whole era of his life. I don't really go into details, but you get a sense of it. And they fought the collectors, who each have like a name. Like one is called like Brooklyn, and one is called like Midtown, and one is called like the Bronx, and one is called like Jersey. And they were the guys who had been working for like the mob, and they controlled those regions of the city, and they all had superpowers from an experiment. And mobsters are forever, right? Mobsters in New York. That's not 2016, right? That's forever. So it just took that out of it. And they weren't particularly racist. They were mixed. The Bronx, I think, I forget. I think Harlem is black because duh. And Midtown is Korean. And like Brooklyn and Jersey and the Bronx are white guys, like Italian guys, I think. I have to remember. They weren't a big part of the book. But they serve the same function. The scenes are almost the same in terms of like the structure, right? Rohan goes, says, I need you guys to help fight the sharks. And they go, why should we help you? And he goes, I'll give you amnesty. And then Bright Angel beats the crap out of him because she's pissed at him for doing that, and it's the same. They serve the same function. Monsters are my favorite kind of fictional scum. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but they're timeless, right? Mobsters have been organized crime has been around for basically forever. It's not particularly tied to anything political, right? Like no one's a big thing. And I took out my favorite joke in Return of the Griffin, which is the Make Earth Great Again hats, Mega, which I thought was hilarious. But it's very specific to this time, and it like anchors the book as being just like what's going on now. And it pulled people out, people who are MAGA and people who hate MAGA, right? Both of them were pulled out of the book by the mega joke, right? So I'm like, that's not what I want to do. And again, I made a video about this, but like, if you want to write political satire, I don't have a problem with that. Like, I think it's fine. But like I think where I felt I went wrong was that Wistful Ascending was not political satire. It was very much like, this is completely separate place, and there's some politics in there, but it's very subtle. It's like, it's just a station where a bunch of people from like 1,000 different worlds get along. There's nothing overt about that message. It's there, but it's like, it's not in your face. And then book 2, you come back and I'm making like actual political satire about current like events in American politics. It felt very jarring to a lot of readers, especially Americans. I think I had less of a problem from like European readers. It wasn't as personal. Didn't pull them out as much. But I took it out. I did. It took me a long time to appreciate that I had made a mistake, because I do think I had made a mistake. I think it was, again, if I had satire in all the books, that would have been fine. That would have been a thing I was doing. But to put it in just book 2 and then never again, no, wasn't cool. Like, it just ruined book 2 for a lot of people, and it shouldn't have. So I fixed it. I changed it. I took that out, and then I put a huge homage to The Last Dragon, which was this like movie, a martial arts movie that came out in like 1986 or 88 or something. And it's like a classic. And yeah. So if anyone has read Return of the Griffin, I've said this, I don't think you need to reread it. I certainly don't. I think it's a better book now. But anyone reading for the first time, I think you'll enjoy it more. But I don't think anyone needs to reread the book. I mean, the overall, I think I did a lot of things better in the rewrite. Like, there were things where I just moved around, like when you found certain things out, like I moved the upper back or chapter. On a reread, it doesn't matter, right? On their first read through, I think it'll be cleaner. But really, the intent is, I mean, I'm imagining that in the future, most of the people who read that book are in the future. I hope, right? Like, I hope I have 10,000 people who will have read it 5 years from now, whereas only like 1,000 have read it like today, or whatever the number is. So, I fixed it.
Yeah, no, Knights of Rill agrees, and I think Derek has a good point here too. It's a creative way to get around that.
Yeah.
All right.
I lost my chance to release those mega hats that I was gonna publish, print up, make Earth great again.
Oh man. Okay. So now we come to a good question here. I'm very curious to know, what are some of your favorite books, favorite authors, and any inspirations for you for your writing?
There are so many. I find this question really tough. I mean, the direct inspirations, right, are I've said, right, Dragon Ball Z, what is that, Akira Toriyama? I want to say his name.
Yep.
I actually haven't read that much of the manga, but I watched like the whole Dragon Ball, all of DBZ, and all of Dragon Ball Super. I never saw Dragon Ball GT, and I haven't seen the new one, but like that stuff. Huge fan of Invincible by Robert Kirkman. I've read a lot of comics in my life, right? So there was actually a comic called The Griffin, whose name I can't remember now. It was like 12 issues from DC, and it was like this character was like a human who'd been recruited by these aliens, and like they gave him superpowers and like turned him into like a soldier. And there was a scene where they're like coming to get him because he ran away, and he's like there's this whole fleet of starships above the earth, and he flies up and just punches them. And that was a huge inspiration for me, like kind of man punching spaceships, right? Which is how I sometimes describe my series. It makes it sound like a little more goofy than it is, but that was really inspirational for me. But I mean, I've read so much, like I mean, from comics perspective, I'm a huge fan of like these people you'd expect. Like I was much more of a Marvel guy, like John Byrne, Chris Claremont, all those old X-Men stuff, Jim Starlin and Frank Miller. Books wise, I read a lot of books. I'm a huge fan of Mal. Like, I can't think of too much that honestly, like, my books are inspired more by comics and manga and movies. Inspired more like Guardians of the Galaxy and like Invincible and like other comics and DBZ anime than by the books I've read, except but I've loved many books. I'm a huge Malazan fan. I really am. I feel like everything in fantasy can be found in the first 10 books of Malazan. Like you just read those 10, it's like everything is in there. Drax the Destroyer I was a huge fan of that. I love Jim Starlin. Everything Starlin did, the Warlock Saga. Jim Starlin's the comic guy. I don't know if you said you're not really a comics guy. Jim Starlin invented like the Infinity Gauntlet, the Guardians of the Galaxy. I think the Guardians of the Galaxy, but like those characters, a lot of the stuff around the like Thanos, that whole cosmic where they're out in space and they're in places that have nothing to do with Earth. Starlin was a huge part of putting that in the Marvel universe. Really, when I was little, like I mean, even when I was reading those were like reprints. Like stuff came out like the early 70s. I was born in 71. So this is early 70s. There's a lot of books I like. I'm a big fan of like Steve Perry. I read a lot of Steve Perry, a lot of like martial arts based like science fiction stuff. The real Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel. You know, it's super interesting. Like the original Captain Marvel was a guy. He was a Kree warrior, had the Nega bands and gave him like powers. First real graphic novel ever made was by Marvel. It was like premium price, bigger than a regular comic. And it was the death of Captain Marvel. That was how and he died of cancer. And it was a really weird story. Like he died and he just died and they never brought him back. Like of all the guys, of all the people they brought back, they never brought him. It's like Change Comics. It was a really funny, not funny, but interesting thing. I mean, I bought that off the rack space or off the stand. I mean, this is going back a ways. Big fan of Nexus and Bad Nexus. Steve Rude and Mike Barron wrote this comic called Nexus. Visually, I like this comic character called Nova who basically just had a helmet and he like flew into things. And that's a visual I really like. The flying and the punching. I like flying and punching. Comic book that made you cry. Yeah. Oh, Captain Marvel. Absolutely. The Death of Captain Marvel. I have that somewhere. I should find that and pull it out for a video. I keep meaning to go through like all my old comics and like make a little video of like unboxing of like stuff that I haven't looked at in 30 years. Because I have boxes I haven't opened since the 20th century. Which is not an exaggeration.
Now that you mention it, I do remember reading a comic when I was younger, and it was incredibly sad too. It made me cry. It was the Batman: A Death in the Family. That was.
I read that.
Oh man! After that, I'm like, okay, I think I want to stay away from this. It's so sad.
Stay away from. Okay. Oh yeah.
Maybe that's what.
Yeah. I don't know. No. I mean, you like what you like. I'm a big fan of Glenn Cook, The Black Company. I read a lot of Glenn Cook. He's written a lot of different stuff. He wrote a bunch of sci-fi. I'm a real fan of The Black Company. I'm a real fan of the P.I. Garrett series, which is like I told you it was noirish type things. That would be a rough introduction to comics. That is absolutely true. No lies told there. Anne Leckie. Anne Leckie. What the hell? What is her series called? I'm blanking. She's a science fiction writer. She wrote a fantasy novel, but she's mostly known for her Ancillary Justice, really good trilogy. Really interesting stuff with artificial intelligences and collective minds, where her ships are like many brains all linked together, but then like pieces of them can get like chopped off or like lost. And then you have like a ship and a bunch of soldiers and they're all like one big intelligence, but then like one of them gets lost. And then you have this part of a mind being on its own and trying to figure out what to do. It doesn't have access to like 98% of its brain. Really good stuff. There's a lot of other cool things in those books, but Anne Leckie is a big fan of hers. Big fan of Murderbot. If you want to get more modern, those are very like there's a tone to Murderbot and you either love it or you don't. Like if you read one and you don't like it, stop. Because they're all very similar, but they're cool. I've read a lot of stuff. Those are big influences and things I really liked. And then you look at specific influence. Like if they like, well, this thing in your book, where did that come from? I can usually tell you, right? Like I'm keenly aware of where I've stolen from, right? So each element in my series, a lot of them are from very specific places, and I'm writing. I'm like, oh, I know where I got this from,
Yeah. But I think the Dragon Ball Z element is a huge draw for me because, man, I love Dragon Ball Z, and I'm rewatching some of it right now with the Bruce Falconer music, and nothing tops the Bruce Falconer music, man. That music is just so good, so good.
Something about like the guys flying and this notion that these ships would come and the guys would get out of the ship and the guys were the dangerous part, not the ship. That was something about that struck me as cool. Like, and I put that in my books, right? Like I just straight up, like, that's why, you know?
Yeah.
And to me, that's like the difference between people who love sci-fi, like the sci-fi, like what I write, or fantasy or whatever is, you know, what do you think is cool? Like, if you think it's cool to like a cop pulls up in his like 70s car and he pulls out a revolver, you're going to read detective books. But if you think it's cool to have like a dude tossing fireballs and like a shield wall in front of him, you're going to read Malazan, right? And if you like think of, you know, someone like, you know, like coming out of the sky and they like hit the ground and like set off like a little earthquake and like knock everyone down, that's a superhero story, you know? And to me, it's just like, they're all in a way, they're the same thing. That's just like, which image gets you, you know? If it's one dude like just punching and kicking a bunch of other dudes, maybe you like a martial arts movie, you know? And they're all fine, right? Like they're all good. It's just like, I'm not a gun guy, you know, like that's not my thing. I write dude punching spaceships.
Yeah.
And giant bugs.
That's fair.
So
second part to this question, one I'm really curious to know, your favorite music, bands, artists, and anything if it was an inspiration.
I have like very what's the word, like a pedestrian musical tastes, right? So I grew up, I mean, I think a lot of people my age, or a lot of people, I like the music I listened to in high school, which is like 80s synth pop, like Depeche Mode, Erasure, some of the heavy metal from that time. Like I won't say no to like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, you know, that kind of thing. I'm never really into. I'm sure I'd like a lot of songs, like Kiss or whatever. And then that's all I listened to, like stuff from I literally listened to like nothing written after 1990 for like 20 years or 25 years. And then I started watching Bollywood movies, and I got really into Bollywood music, and not even the South Asian stuff, but but like the worst of it, like the top 40 stuff from India, right? The stuff that like top of the charts, like the most for the masses. So like, you know, like the songs that are in like the top grossing movies. I love those. That's what I listen to when I write. Almost all Bollywood music. And I have a Spotify playlist of Rohan's work list, because, you know, Rohan's always listening to music at work. Yeah. And like all those songs, I just pull them off my playlist when I want to say what song is coming on next. And I don't understand any of the words, right? Because I don't speak any Hindi. Most of these are in Hindi, and then because Bollywood. But they have English sprinkled in there, you know, like in like a phrase, like a bunch of stuff, and then I love you, and then a bunch of stuff, sexy lady. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Just stuff you can dance to. It's very and I talk to Indian people, and they're like, really, that's the music from our culture, like the lowest common denominator music. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's what I like. And I don't have any like this esoteric band that like no one's ever heard of, but they do this classical stuff. I have no idea. That's not my thing. It really is the lowest common denominator music from India. I love that. I don't know why, but I that's what I listen to. And stuff you can dance to, I guess. Yeah. But in the, like, you know, with pulp, the equivalent of pulp, right, in music. Stuff that's like very accessible, very easy. Yeah, poppy trash. That's a good explanation for it.
Is it? So is that it? Okay.
that's base poppy trash. Yeah.
And I'm much more screaming for vengeance.
I don't know that. But
that's cool.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I post the link to because the Spotify my Rohan's work playlist. I had it's a Spotify public playlist. Every once in a while, I post a link to it, and every once in a while, someone will listen to it and be like, "Oh, this is kind of."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's nothing special if you just put in. I'm a metalhead.
Nicer
I like
Rotasty.
metal. I like a little bit of metal. Like I'm always happy to listen to some Iron Maiden or some Jude. But usually, what it's also like what I put on when I'm writing. I'm going to put on. I like the advantage to me as a writer listening to the Bollywood music is I don't understand any of the words, so it doesn't like pull me into the lyrics when I'm trying to write my own stuff. So I don't end up just because you can get sucked into the lyrics, then you're thinking about the lyrics, and then you're not writing your book,
Mm-hmm.
But with this stuff, I don't understand any of it, so I can't. So it's almost like instrumentals in that way, right? So it's good
Yeah.
for me. And that's the only time I don't listen to a ton of music. Usually, if I'm like doing something else, I'm listening to podcasts or like BookTube. Some kind of BookTube is playing when I'm doing other things. When I'm playing a video game, I'm usually listening to like an author interview or like someone reviewing a book or something like that. More than music. It's when I'm writing. Even when I work out, I'm usually listening to a podcast. And when I drive a lot, so again podcasts. And I don't even listen to audiobooks. I don't know why. I drive a lot because my kids live 4.5 hours away. So I spend a week a month with my son. So it's a 4-hour drive.
Yeah.
So a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You really need that.
Yeah. All right. Finally, this is we've come to the end. I just wanted to ask what upcoming plans or projects you have in the works. I know there's a whole lot of Hybrid Helix on the way, so I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, I don't have a very from a sort of narrative perspective, I know what I want to do with the series. I don't really have like an outline of each book for the next 18 books. I don't work that way. I'm usually like, I'm writing book 7. I know what happens in book 7. By the time I'm done with book 7, I'll have a really like general idea of what happens in book 8. So book 7 and 8 should come out this year, unless something goes really wrong. And then I really want to get 2 a year. That's my real plan. And I'll have to figure out when it ends, but it's going to be something like 18 to 25 books. That's the plan. I know what I want to happen. And there are things you can do with a really long series that you can't do in a trilogy. You can't do in one book. You can come back to that thing we got a hint for that 7 books ago. You can't do that unless you have an 8-book series, right?
Mhm.
So that's really my main goal. At some point, I'd like to write. I have a pretty good idea for things to do with 2 more books in the partial function series. I'm pretty sure I'll get to that at some point. I don't know when. That book didn't sell very well. I don't know why. I thought it would be really marketable. It seemed like a book that people would really enjoy, and yet it had never taken off, which is fine. I wrote that book to go into SFF, and then I got eliminated in the lottery. I don't know if you're familiar with SFF, the self-published fantasy. It's the big fantasy contest.
Yeah.
So this year they had too many entrants. So instead of lopping it off at like the first 300 get in, Mark Lawrence took whoever entered the first day got in, but then they did a lottery because it was too many books. They just randomly picked 300 who would actually be in. So my book got eliminated without anyone reading it. It wasn't on quality. It was just on the lottery. So I was like, okay. I really wrote that book in a rage because I was like, I can write a fantasy book because I got eliminated from SFF 8. And I was like, damn it, they didn't like my book because it wasn't fantasy. I can write a fantasy book that'll win this thing. And I did. And I wrote that in like 6 weeks. And then I was like, and then I didn't get in. It was really funny. But I have a solid idea for 2 more books in that series. I highly doubt I would write more. And then I'd like to write more Grimdwarf, but I don't have any actual plans for that. So this year you should really expect from me 2 more Hybrid Helix books, 7 and 8. 7 is called Shield of the Mothership. 8, I don't even have a working title for yet. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with book 8. I have a very solid idea, but it might be book 8 or book 9. So I have to figure it out. But I have time. And then I really want to do 2 a year. And then I don't have any plans for anything else right now. And then I'm trying to get audio for books 2 and at least books 2 and 3 done this fall. So 2025. People really been asking me for more audio. It's money. It's like $3,000 out of my pocket up front. So, I have money, but I don't have infinite money. I mean, I spent a lot on covers, spent a lot on editing. So, you know, it already you got to figure releasing a book cost me $6,000, and I'm not seeing that. Like, I might take, you know, I might get that back over the course of like 10 months, but it's really just out of my pocket. So I can't just I can't just say, oh, just do 5 more audiobooks and that's 15 grand, you know, and I just write a check. I mean, I can, but
Yeah.
at some point my wife's like, how much did you spend? So
That's fair.
wait,
That's fair.
yeah.
No, I know you've been asked this already, but I got to press you on it again. Would you consider, or is there even in your mind having, what do you call them, omnibus editions or special editions, any kind of, Kickstarter, what have you?
I would love that. And I would almost definitely do it with help. Here's the problem. Remember I told you I'm not a good art director?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not good at like looking at someone's portfolio and being like, oh, this person would do, because I've looked at people's portfolios and said, oh, this guy would, would work for me. And then it doesn't. Right. So, I would need help. Like, if Broken Binding would work with me, if Wraithmark would work with me, I'd love that. But
Mhm.
to do it on my own, it would probably take, I don't have the time because I'm not good at finding artists and like formatting and like, because you'll show me something and I'll be like, oh, this, do you want like this or this? And I'm like, oh, they both look great to me. And then like someone who knows art, like Jeff Brown, will be like, oh no, that one's good and that one's not. I don't
Yeah.
have that skill. So I need someone like Jeff Brown or like Patrick. Honestly, Patrick Leo is actually a really good art director. Like
Mhm.
I don't know, you know who I'm talking about. That he's a booktuber and he's done work for like Broken Binding and stuff. If like Patrick Leo
Mhm.
was going to work with me and like help me design a special edition, that'd be great. But I'm not. I can't do that on my own. I don't have the skill set. You need the skills or the time. You know,
Mhm.
you put in a lot of hours, you can sort of figure it out. But I don't have the time to do that and write books.
Yeah.
So that is absolutely something I would like to do. And I work with Broken Binding. They sell my books with book plates, right? Signed book plates. And I
Mhm.
will sell signed books myself on occasion. But and if I sold enough books through them, eventually they would do a special edition. But I'm not a big seller for them. So all of it's about selling. Like if I released a Wraithmark, Broken Binding, they can look on Amazon and see how many books I'm selling, right? It's not a mystery. So if those people would work with me, I would love to do it, but I can't do it on my own without not writing, like only writing 1 book this year. And that's not a trade-off I'm willing to make.
Mhm.
Or if I like if it's all about sales, if I sold enough books and I was like, if I could quit my day job, absolutely, like
We got
that'd
to
be
start
great.
a petition or something. We got to get that going.
Well, I don't know.
I would love a set to grace my shelves. That's why I ask. So I'm like,
Yeah, I
maybe.
would like an omnibus. I thought of an idea. It'd be cool to have like the first 5 books in like 2 sets of 3, with the 6th book being like all the shorts. Maybe add a couple novellas to stick in there because I like my short. My shorts aren't great, but I think they're fun.
Mhm.
I've had ideas like that. It's just like I don't have and Kickstarter. I mean, there's a value in doing a Kickstarter because you reach a different audience. There are people who only look at Kickstarter, so otherwise will never find your book. So
Right.
it would be good for me to do something like that, but I don't have the time to do it right, and I wouldn't want to just like have a version of my own book coming out that's not really that special and put a Kickstarter behind it. If I'm going to do a Kickstarter, I want it to be something really cool, and I
Mhm.
don't have time to set up something really cool. Again, if I was good at finding art, it'd be different, but I realized I'm not. I spent some time at it. I'm like, I'm not good at this. There are people who are, and I'm like, well, that guy's good at it, but I'm not. So we'll see. Maybe in a year I'll change my mind. A little more sales, I don't know, or not. But my bigger goal is to write the 25 book series. And that means something to me. Like because you see these the bigger themes,
Mhm.
understanding compassion over hatred, That means something to me to tell that story. And
Right.
having cool art isn't cool, but it
Mhm.
doesn't that to me that's not what I'm about. I'm not an artist, right? I'm a writer.
Yeah.
So it's more about so as soon as I think, okay, doing this thing might make me money, but it will like interfere with my writing, I'm like, okay, I'm not doing that. I want to tell the story I want to tell, and I'm old, so like I don't have infinite time to knock this out. You know, like my dad died at 58, and I'm 54, right? So like
No.
I can, you can't count on, oh, I'll be 70 still writing these books, right? Like I'd
Yeah.
like to, that'd be great, but I can't, I can't just count on that, right? That's not how life works. So
Mhm.
that's my priority.
Well, I'll take it. Keep the Hybrid Helix books coming. I'll take it because it's fantastic work.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, man. I really do. And that's why I'm writing them. Like if people weren't reading them and enjoying them, I'd stop.
Mhm.
Like some people are like, oh, I write for me. I'm like, I kind of do, but I kind of also like if I didn't have readers, I wouldn't. This is too much work to do just for me. Like I enjoy it, but like also like it's because other people are getting something out of it that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. Well,
So
thank you very much, Joe, for
thank
joining
you,
me
Usman.
on this chat. No,
Yeah, it's
it's
my
yeah,
pleasure.
it's been fun.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
to everybody in the comments and everybody
Yeah,
watching this.
thanks, guys.
Yeah, we will end it here, and we'll see everybody next time. Take care.